Assalamu alaikum everyone. This is Ayman Nazir and welcome to Knowledge Realm. So students, we are covering International Relations Part 1. And in the previous lectures, Alhamdulillah, we have covered Classical Realism and Structural Realism in detail. Today I thought that how about we try to compare these two theories and we try to understand that what were the differences between the views of ancient scholars of realism and the modern scholars of realism? The ancient scholars like Thucydides and Niccolo Machiavelli, they gave classical realism. And the modern scholars like John Mearsheimer and Kenneth Waltz, they gave a modern concept called structural realism or new realism. Indeed, the modern scholars, they drew their beliefs from the beliefs of ancient scholars, that is classical realism. But there were some differences. Classical realism and structural realism are different from each other, and today we will try to understand that what are the differences between these two concepts. So let's get started. Students, before learning the differences between classical realism and structural realism, let's study the similarity between these two theories. And students, the fundamental belief of classical realism and structural realism is same. They both believe that international politics is conflictual inherently. The nature of international politics is conflictual, and international politics is nothing but power politics. All the empires, all the states, all the individuals, in fact, they try to maximize their power. And this is what they do in politics. Why they want to maximize their power? Because they all the time feel threat to their survival from all other bodies, from all other entities. And to neutralize this threat to their survival, they want to maximize their power. The realist scholars believe that they can ensure their survival only if they increase their military power and they develop weapons like nuclear weapons, atomic bombs, and all these kind of weapons. So this is the way to neutralize the threat and to ensure their survival. And if we learn the history of humanity, we would realize that in all eras of in all empires, this was the common feature, this was the common problem, that every empire felt threat to their survival from all other entities, and to neutralize that threat, what they did, they maximize their power. I have mentioned some examples here. The Sparta and Athens, they fought in 431 BC. They fought the Peloponnesian War. Why they fought these wars? Because the power of Sparta was increasing. Athens at that time were superpower of Greek, but the Sparta were increasing their power. That increase in power instilled a fear in Athens. Athens felt threat to their survival, not only to their survival, but also to the status of their superpower. They were superpower at the time, and Sparta were increasing their power. So Athens felt that if the Sparta comes at par with Athens, the Sparta would eventually overthrow Athens, and after that they would persecute them. So to neutralize this threat and to prevent their persecution, they resort to war with Sparta, and then they fought the Peloponnesian War. There's a very interesting quote in the history of Peloponnesian War, the book written by Thucydides, who was the pioneer of classical realism. There's a very interesting quote, and I personally like that quote very much. The quote is, by necessary law of human nature, man rules wherever it can. Thucydides finds that it is the nature of human, that human would rule wherever it can. And after that he says that it is not as if we are the first to make this rule or to make good use of this rule. We found it existing. This is the nature of the world. This is the nature of universe, that the the man rules wherever it can. Then he says that we found it existing. We are just making good use of it, knowing that you or any other being had been in our place would have done the same to us as we are doing to you. So this is simply nothing but power politics. Then France and Britain, They fought war in 15th century. Why? Because they wanted to increase their power. They wanted to maintain their status of superpower of the world. Then Ottoman Empire and Byzantine Empire, they both fought. Then there was World War One because Germany wanted to rule the world. Then there was World War Two because Hitler wanted to rule the world. Hitler wanted to maximize their power and ensure their survival. Then in 1950s, USA and USSR, they fought a new kind of war that was Cold War. Why? Because they both the powers, there was bipolarity in the world at the time. The international order was bipolar, and USA wanted to increase its power. USSR wanted to increase its own power. So this was just power politics. And this is the belief of all the realist scholars, be it classical realism, be it structural realism. They just want to increase their power. Today, this concept of classical realism and structural realism holds good even today. The USA and China, these two powers today are engaged in a new kind of war that is Cold War. The USA is making efforts to curb the rise of China. Why? Because USA fears that if China overthrows the USA as the superpower of the world, the survival of USA would be threatened. And would China would rule the world then, and China would make policies that favors the rise of China, and USA would be nowhere then. So this is the fundamental belief of classical realism and structural realism as well, which is simply nothing but power politics. Let's compare these two theories, starting with the timeline. Students, classical realism is a very old and timeless theory. Thucydides is considered the pioneer of classical realism. He wrote the book The History of Peloponnesian War, and in that war he tried to analyze the causes of the Peloponnesian Wars, the wars fought by Sparta and Athens, and he actually emphasized on the nature of humans, on the nature of nations. He believed that nations want to increase their power only, and in that effort, they resort to violence and chaos and war because they want to increase their power, because they are selfish, they are greedy of gain, and they they do not want to lose their hegemony on the power. Then there came Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince. That was a kind of letter to the Prince of Italy at the time. Niccolo Machiavelli also emphasized on power maximization, the power maximization by the state leaders, by the empires. And there's a very interesting quote of Niccolo Machiavelli. He says that the conventional religious morality is for common citizen. A prince should not follow the conventional religious morality. A prince should follow the ethics of responsibility, because a citizen is not responsible for the survival of his estate, but a prince is responsible for the survival and for the well-being of his nation. So a prince should maximize its power, and a prince should create its hegemony on the state. Then there came Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes gave the concept of social contract theory, and he also opined that in the state of nature, the human life is solitary, brutish, and nasty. So to eliminate this kind of state and to maintain peace, social peace, there should be a Leviathan who has absolute power, absolute control on the power, and whose power is who is indomitable, right? So this was the classical realism. Then there came structural realism. Structural realism is relatively new. It was presented by Kenneth Waltz in 1978, and Kenneth Waltz and John Mearsheimer, these are the two most famous structural realists, and they did not emphasize on human nature excessively. They emphasized on the system, right? Then there comes the approach. Students, classical realism, they base their narrative of a flawed and selfish human nature on knowledge taken from history. This theory is based on traditional approach. What is this traditional approach? I've explained this in my previous lecture. The traditional approach, simply they take knowledge from history, and they base their theories and their hypothesis on that knowledge from history, right? They try to analyze the history. And the classical realists, they just studied the history of wars and all the conflicts in international politics, and they developed this theory based on the based on the knowledge taken from history, right? This is what Thucydides did. This is what Niccolo Machiavelli did. This is what Thomas Hobbes did, and this is what Hans Morgenthau did. There's a very interesting quote of Hans Morgenthau also. He said that um, the universal moral principles cannot be applied on the actions of states. And this quote is very similar to the quote of Niccolo Machiavelli, who says that the ethics of responsibility are for prince and not the conventional religious morality, right? So it makes sense now, right? It means that all these classical realist scholars, all these scholars take knowledge from the history. They just analyze the history, that how human behaved in the past, and how their nature is flawed, right? But these structural realists, their approach is very interesting. They they developed this theory based on this systemic approach. They say that we should not emphasize on human nature, and we should not put all blame on human nature. We should try to analyze the system. It is the system that is flawed. It is the international system that is flawed, right? And they analyze the system, and they base their knowledge on systemic approach. They say that the system is anarchic, and this anarchy urge nations to behave violently. There's this quote of Kenneth Waltz. He says that it is not possible to understand world politics simply by looking inside of states. They say that we should not just emphasize excessively on the human nature, and we should try to understand the system in which these states operate. Take an example of Pakistan's nuclear weapon project. Why Pakistan developed nuclear weapons? Because the leaders were aggressive, or they were selfish, or they wanted to increase their power? No, they they did not develop nuclear weapons because they were selfish. They developed these weapons because of the system, the flawed system. They developed nuclear weapons in 1998 because they felt threatened from India. India had developed the nuclear weapons in 1970s. I do not remember the exact year. I think it was in 1976. The project was the Smiling Buddha. Right after that, Pakistan was a rival country. Pakistan felt threatened. Pakistan knew that if India attacks Pakistan in the future, no one would come to save Pakistan. It was the flawed system of the international society that urged Pakistan, that compelled Pakistan to pursue power politics and to develop nuclear weapons. So this is the approach of structural realist scholars, and this is a very logical kind of theory, I would say, are very logical. And all these structural realists like Kenneth Waltz and John Mearsheimer, they believe that the system is flawed, and this international anarchy, it urges states to behave violently and to pursue power politics, right? Now, level of analysis. Classical realist scholars, they analyze international politics at individual level, whereas structural realist scholars, they analyze international politics at international level. Classical realists believe that the problem is in human nature. Human nature is selfish, hypocritical, and greedy of gain. There is a very interesting quote of Niccolo Machiavelli. He says that of mankind, we may say in general that they are fickle, hypocritical, and greedy of gain. And this selfishness and this greed of gain urge humans to wage war on others and to kill others. They want to maximize their power because they want to rule the world, and they do not want to share the resources of the world with other nations. So the human nature is flawed. This is the belief of classical realist scholars. They give the examples of warlords like Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Zahiruddin Babur, and Ashoka. All these warlords of ancient time, they waged war on other empires, on innocent people. They killed innocent people. Why? Because they just wanted to increase their territory. They wanted to increase their power. They wanted to rule the world, and it was in their nature. But they were greedy of gain. They were greedy of power. From the current time, if we give example, the classical realists believe that Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, he is aggressive. He is greedy of power, and he want to increase his power. This is the reason that he waged war on Ukraine. He is aggressive. So this is how they analyze the Russia-Ukraine war of 2020. in 2022. Then structural realists, on the other hand, they believe that the problem is not in human nature. They do not emphasize on human nature. They emphasize international system. They say that the problem is in the international system. The international system is anarchic and it urges human to pursue power to ensure their survival. Now, what does this word anarchy means? Anarchy simply means that the absence of a supra-sovereign authority. There is no supra-sovereign authority in the international system like we have that in at the national level. At the national level, there is a police, the police force. The police force prevent the evil actors from violating other people's, from violating human rights, right? I cannot kill anybody and no one can kill me unreasonably, right? Only in accordance with law, right? Only the police has the right, and the judiciary has the right to eliminate people, to execute people, right? But this does not work at the international level. At the international level, any nation can wage war on the other nation, and no one would come to save the victim, right? This is the belief of a structural realist scholars. They say that this is the flaw in the international politics, right? John Mearsheimer, there is a very interesting quote. He says that in the anarchic world of international politics, it is better to be Godzilla than Bombay. John Mearsheimer is an offensive structural realist, and he opines that the international system is anarchic. There is no supra-sovereign authority. No one would come to save a nation if the nation gets attacked, right? So, to to neutralize the threat to survival, states must maximize their power. Take a very good example here of Pakistan developing nuclear weapons. Why Pakistan developed nuclear weapons in 1998? Because the leaders were aggressive, because they wanted to increase their power, because they wanted to create their hegemony in the region. Nothing like this was in the mind of Pakistani leaders at that time. They developed nuclear weapons because they were threatened by India. In 1976, I do not remember the year exactly, but I think it was 1976, the India developed nuclear weapons under the project named Smiling Buddha. India developed nuclear weapons, and those weapons posed threat to the survival of Pakistan. Pakistan is a rival state. Unfortunately, there is a rivalry, there is enmity between these two states. So Pakistan felt threatened. Pakistan knew that if in future India attacks Pakistan, no one would come to save Pakistan. Like no one went to save Iraq when it got attacked by USA. No one went to save Iran when it got attacked by USA recently in 2025 under the operation named Operation Midnight Hammer. So all this flaw of international system, these flaws of international system urge nations to pursue power politics, right? So I've given some examples here. US invaded Iraq and Afghanistan in 2003 and 2001 respectively. Then Ukraine aspiration to join NATO posing threat to Russian security. Now, students, let's see that how these two bodies of scholarship analyze the Russia-Ukraine war. Classical realist scholars believe that the Russian president Vladimir Putin waged war on Ukraine because he himself is aggressive. It is the aggressive nature of Vladimir Putin that caused the war in Ukraine. On the other hand, structural realists, they give a very logical and very interesting kind of a reason. They analyze it at the systemic level. They say that Ukraine aspires to join NATO. Now NATO is a international kind of military organization of Western nations, right? Now this aspiration of Ukraine is posing severe threat to Russian security. Now Russia knows that if Ukraine joins NATO, the Ukraine land could be used for waging war or for launching attack on Russia. Ukraine is right across the Russian western border, right? So Ukraine can become a military base of USA in the future if Ukraine joins NATO. So this is a threat to Russian security, And to neutralize this threat, Russia waged war on Ukraine, and Russia now wants to annex Ukraine, some part of Ukraine, and is uh, Russia is Russia is saying that if Ukraine relinquishes this aspiration to join NATO, Russia would stop war. Right? So this is how structural realist scholars analyze this Russia-Ukraine war. So I hope that this level of analysis is clear and we can move forward. Now, state behavior. Classical realist scholars believe that state behavior is influenced by its leader. It is the leader who decides the direction in which the state would go, and it is the leader who steers the course of the action of the states, right? And they believe that leaders are rational and they state centric. Whatever they do for the benefit of a state and their people. On the other hand, structural realists, they say that state behavior is influenced by the system in which states are living. States must ensure their survival because there is anarchy and mistrust. There is a very interesting concept. They call it outside in. They say that it is not inside out, but it is outside in, right? Whatever happens in the international society, at whatever happens at the outside influences the actions of a state inside, right? For example, the Ukraine wants to join NATO. That international dynamic influenced the action of Russia inside, right? Russia waged war. Why? Because at the outside, Ukraine wanted to join NATO. That aspiration of Ukraine threatened the security of Russia, right? And the threat which was outside influenced the action of Russia inside, right? Then the need of power. Classical realists believe that human pursues power because he is greedy of gain. All this is about human nature. This is what classical realists believe. On the other hand, structural realist scholars, they believe that human pursues power because there is mistrust in the world, and to ensure survival in the world, power is necessary. You cannot do without power. You cannot live without power. So it is very important for states and individuals as well to ensure their survival. They want power, right? Now, the types. There is no further division in classical realism. But there is division in structural realism. There are two types of structural realism. There is defensive realism and offensive realism. In defensive realism, states gain power only to ensure their survival. The defensive realist states, they're not interested in waging war with their rivals. They are only interested in ensuring their survival. Take the example of Pakistan acquiring nuclear weapons in 1998. Pakistan acquired nuclear weapons because India had already developed nuclear weapons in 1976. Pakistan felt threat and Pakistan wanted to ensure its survival. So Pakistan acquired nuclear weapons not because it wanted to wage war with any nation. No, it just wanted to ensure its own survival. So the policy of Pakistani leaders at that time was defensive realist policy, right? Now there is offensive realism. In offensive realism, states gain power to create their hegemony on other states and their rivals. They want to curb the rise of other states and they want to create their hegemony. They do not want any state to challenge their hegemony. This is the policy of superpowers and warlords, right? For example, the USA. Right now, the policy of USA is the offensive realist policy. The USA attacked Iraq in 2003 because it pursues the policy of offensive realism. Today, it is posing trade tariffs on. It is imposing trade tariffs on China because it wants to curb the rise of China, and they mostly the superpowers and warlords, they pursue the policy of offensive realism because they feel threat to their hegemony and they just are hungry for power and gain, and they want to maintain their hegemony, right? Now, ways to maintain peace. After analyzing all the international politics and the problems and the conflicts in the international arena, both the bodies, they definitely give some ways to maintain peace in the world. And now this is a similarity between these two bodies, and they give a simple option. They say that just if you want peace, maintain power, increase your power. Power maximization is the solution presented by classical realist scholars, and power maximization is the solution presented by structural realist scholars as well. They say that to increase military power to deter other people from attacking oneself, right? They say that if you want peace in the world, increase power. Now, this is there is a very interesting quote of John F. Kennedy as well. He says that if you want peace, prepare for war. This is the realist perspective, right? So, students, we are done with this comparison of classical realism and structural realism. I've tried my best to explain this, and this was very interesting. I enjoyed this lecture, and I hope that all the listeners would also enjoy this lectures. Now, in the next lecture, inshallah, we would cover new liberalism in detail. That topic is also very interesting. We would try to cover that in detail, and inshallah, after that, we would cover new debate, right? So, very interesting lectures are on their way. So, if you want to learn more, don't forget to subscribe. So, thank you so much, and Allah Hafiz for today.